Greetings and salutations. Welcome to another chapter of a Design for Living Big Book study. Today we are here with Elizabeth, BL, and WG for Chapter 11, A Vision for You. We're going to get into early sobriety and why stopping drinking is just not enough. And we're going to find out a little bit about the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. Chapter 11, page 151. Chapter 11, A Vision for You. For most normal folks, drinking means conviviality, companionship, and colorful imagination. It means release from care, boredom, and worry. It is joyous intimacy with friends and a feeling that life is good. But not so with us in those last days of heavy drinking. The old pleasures were gone. They were but memories. Never could we recapture the great moments of the past. There was an insistent yearning to enjoy life as we once did, and a heartbreaking obsession that some new miracle of control would enable us to do it. There was always one more attempt and one more failure. The less people tolerated us, the more we withdrew from society, from life itself, as we became subjects of King Alcohol, shivering denizens of his mad realm. The chilling vapor that is loneliness settled down. It thickened, ever becoming blacker. Some of us sought out sordid places, hoping to find understanding, companionship, and approval. Momentarily we did, then would come oblivion and the awful awakening to face the hideous four horsemen: terror, bewilderment, frustration, despair. Unhappy drinkers who read this page will understand. Elizabeth?
Oh, you want me to comment on that? Sorry. It's hard for me to connect with this. I'm Elizabeth, I'm an alcoholic. Honestly, in some ways it's difficult for me to connect with these paragraphs, because I got here by accident. It was in reflection that I saw everything. You know, I didn't see it while I was in it. Like some people do go through that time and they see it while they're in it and they realize the problem. It was upon reflection when I did my first, I had a early sponsor say, write an inventory of your drinking. And I was horrified because I never looked at it, you know, and I could see it all the way through. And I remember this saying something to someone once, and she said, yeah, I always thought you were crying out for help. And that really surprised me, you know. And I was a very, pretty lonely my whole life. And alcohol allowed me to connect with people, you know, just like it says, you know, I'm looking for a connection and I don't know how to connect. And alcohol allowed me to, you know, reduce that inhibition that I had and that fear. And then it stopped working. It definitely stopped working. I do remember that. I was like, this isn't working anymore. You know, if it was still working, I might still be doing it, right? And it stopped. So nothing I was doing was working. And I did get to a place where I started to ask what's wrong. And then luckily I asked my father, who was in AA. And he was the one that eventually got me to the rooms. But yeah, I can connect with some of these sentences with regard to self-will, which my sponsor took me through the book at 14 years sober on what I was struggling to manage at that time in my life. And so when it says things like there's always one more attempt and one more failure, the heartbreaking obsession that some numerical control would enable us to do it, one more attempt, one more failure, the less people tolerate us. I can see that through selfishness. You know, the more that I tried to get my way, the more I tried to manage, the less people could stand me. You know, I didn't see it at the time. Again, didn't see it at the time. You know, it was in hindsight when I learned more about what the bondage of self can end up making us look like. And we can be some pretty, you know, unpleasant people, stone cold sober, you know, by being totally self-absorbed and not even seeing how we're affecting others. So go ahead, Bill.
I did want to refer back to the doctor's opinion because there's a paragraph that kind of is a bit misleading. It says men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. That's what it's telling us here. For most normal folks, drinking means conviviality, companionship, release from care, boredom, worry, colorful imagination. And that's the effect that alcohol produces on probably just about everyone, including alcoholics. Now, with us, it gives us a connection to the divine. Did you hear anything I just said?
Yeah, everything. You just
Okay, I
right at the
muted
end of
myself
divine,
accidentally.
you
I
muted
couldn't believe
yourself.
it. Jesse popped on and my computer muted itself. I had an allergic reaction to him. Welcome, Jesse. So, um, because we're an extreme example of the human condition, alcohol does something for us before it does something to us. I'm pretty sure it does something for everyone because very few people drink whiskey for the taste. It's not very palatable. But what happens, the book says, is we as alcoholics cross into a different thing. Let me read the paragraph so that we don't mess it up. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Then I think what happens is it morphs into alcoholism because it says the sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot after a time differentiate the true from the false. And that's what happens to us, regardless of what's crumbling around in the advanced stages of alcoholism. We can't imagine life with or without it. It's going to tell us that. And our life really becomes the only normal one. We don't understand why everyone doesn't drink the way we do until we want to drink like them and can't. It's just the yearning to enjoy life as we once did, which means through those rose-colored glasses and a heartbreaking obsession that some new miracle of control would enable us to do it. Those are pretty strong words. Heartbreaking. I can't find a way to ingest the chemical that allows me to cope with the life that the chemical has brought upon me as a result of my inability to control the amount of the chemical once I put it in me. And I know, my sponsor said selfish people are lonely people. And Elizabeth was talking about that. We drive people out of our lives. And some of us have grave emotional and mental disorders and wouldn't know that till you come to AA. Everyone knew there was something wrong with me from the time I was 3 or 4 years old, and it kept morphing and morphing and morphing. Thank God for the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, realizing that when they say in step 4, being convinced that self manifested, and then we look at the second manifestation of self, which is fear, which is really, as you guys talked about over the past couple of weeks, Elizabeth, that's the underlying force to everything in my life. Self-centered fear and what was going on in the home. I had no way to contain it inside of myself, and it kept coming out, and it kept coming out, and it came out in malice. It came out in disruption. It came out in need for attention, disturbance in the class. And the more those things took place, the further and further behind I would fall in life and start to feel more of that anxious apartment. I just wanted to be regular normals, whatever that term is. And I'm telling you, this is long before I have ever had a drink. And so initially, alcohol gave me relief from that condition. But when you start, Elizabeth got sober at 12 or 13 years old. I'm a late bloomer. I came into AA at 21. But when you've only been drinking for a short while and you find yourself in Alcoholics Anonymous, probably being directed by something much greater than ourselves, because I wouldn't have picked this at 21 years old to come and join AA. I just became legal to drink. That there's something wrong and alcohol's not the problem, that this is the panacea, this is the place where the misfit kids go. And I don't know it because drinking and drugging them because it causes the problems. I forget the underlying causing of that drinking and drugging and that just that excessive advanced stage. I would listen to people. I got sober in an area where when they told their story, they didn't cut themselves off at 20 minutes. They told their whole story, which means you spent 40 minutes on a drunkalogue. Well, they drank for longer than I was alive, and I would sit there and salivate. Like if I had drank that much, then I'd be an alcoholic. And I kept looking at the symptom rather than the problem. And it caused me a lot of years of believing that I hadn't drank enough or heard enough or was bad enough to belong to Alcoholics Anonymous. I never paid attention to the symptoms. And because I didn't realize that I had the problem, the solution, which had been there the whole time, never made sense for me to apply to my life until it made sense that I had to apply it or die. That's enough about that. Elizabeth, you want to read the next paragraph or two?
Now and then, right?
What's that?
Now and then.
Yep.
Okay. Now and then a serious drinker being dry at the moment says, I don't miss it at all. Feel better, work better, having a better time. As ex-problem drinkers, we smile at such a sally. We know our friend is like a boy whistling in the dark to keep up his spirits. He fools himself. Inwardly, he would give anything to take half a dozen drinks and get away with them. He will presently try the old game again, for he isn't happy about his sobriety. He cannot picture life without alcohol. Someday he will be unable to imagine life either with alcohol or without it. Then he will know loneliness as few do. He will be at the jumping off place. He will wish for the end. We have shown how we got out from under. You say, yes, I'm willing. But am I to be consigned to a life where I shall be stupid, boring, and glum, like some righteous people I see? I know I must get along without liquor, but how can I? Have you a sufficient substitute? Yes, there is a substitute, and it is vastly more than that. It is a fellowship in Alcoholics Anonymous. There you will find release from care, boredom, and worry. Your imagination will be fired. Life will mean something at last. The most satisfactory years of your existence lie ahead. Thus we find the fellowship, and so will you. Wow. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, because I like to talk about the first paragraph. It says a lot to me. So what they're doing is they're talking about an alcoholic who's not drinking for a while and is convincing himself that alcohol's the problem. He's showing everyone that what a great guy he is now that he's not drinking. I work better. My wife's more pleased with me. I'm having a better time. And it says as ex-problem drinkers. And it talks about that term twice. I believe it talks about that in the book where it says as ex-problem drinkers, our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend on our constant thought of others. So what they're doing is describing an alcoholic being an ex-problem drinker. The problem has been solved. And it says we smile at such a sally, someone who's a goofy guy trying to kid himself, because inwardly he would do anything to take a half a dozen drinks and get away with them, for he isn't happy about his sobriety. And when they talk about the jumping off place, one of my friends here described it best, and I probably hear it from most of you guys in your stories. Very few of us wanted to commit suicide while under the influence of alcohol. But you take the booze away and let me look at the hopeless condition of my life and know what Dr. Silkworth says. There are those that make the supreme sacrifice rather than fight again when it comes to the phenomenon of craving. Because I can't stop. I lost the will to fight. I just can't do anything more. I've tried everything in my power and nothing seems to work. And people talk about my bottom, my bottom, my bottom. One of my friends points out that this is the bottom. When you know loneliness like few people know, when you wish for the end, when you're at the jumping off place, that's pretty well the bottom. The circumstances that happen outside the jails, the DUIs, the beatings, the stabbings, the shootings, those just have to do with the environment I was in the last time I opened my big mouth when it was full of alcohol. But the bottom is when I'm so disconnected from life, from society, from God himself, and ultimately separated from myself, that life just doesn't seem worth living. And I can't imagine life either with a drink or without it. Elizabeth?
Oh, I mean, that sentence about unable to imagine life with or with alcohol, since this group is not affiliated with any of the A's, I will go ahead and say that, where it says each person tells in their own story, in their own language, and from their own point of view, how they developed their relationship with God. And what happened for me, I did get in here easily. I got to AA easily, but at 14 years sober, I was in a very unhealthy relationship that I couldn't seem to leave. And I kept going back and he would tell me everything I wanted to hear, and I wanted to hear it. I mean, it was more than I'd ever gotten, telling me like, I love you more than anybody. I need you. Things I'd wanted to hear all my life. And I would always go back, and then it would always be bad. And the words and actions wouldn't match. And I would sit there like just hating myself for going back, and then I got to a place where I thought about that word powerless, and I got to another place where I thought, what's wrong with me? Why do I keep going back to this? I know everything about it. This is like dating my mom. I mean, I dated dad before, he's a little absent. Mom's a little bit more directly. Yeah. And I had the knowledge, but didn't have the power. And I thought about the word powerless, and that word, like, imagine my life with or without, I thought, oh, this is the love of my life. I was very, I probably could have qualified for SLA. But I'm sure I did. Hopefully not now, but we don't know, probably. But yeah, so I just, love that line, because that's where it got to for me. And I share that partly because, yay, it is an AA, like you said, but also because I'm sure I'm not the only person that has gotten to a place later in sobriety, because I've heard of it, where you hit that other bottom when you're trying to make life work the way you need it to prop you up, to be the thing that fills the hole in my soul. My sponsor said we get sober and then we use everything else and as long as it works, that's what we do. Look at people, some people are perpetual caretakers, some are perpetual victims, some are, little Mr. Know-it-alls, Ms. Know-it-alls. We find our safe havens and we stay there, whether it's a substance, a behavior, or belief system. And then at some point, it doesn't work. And that's that jumping off point. What am I going to do now? Do I trust? And I always think about page 53 when I think about it. That bridge of reason is the known. We didn't like to lose our support. That's what I know. And now you're telling me this isn't working. And there's that space, right? There's that time in the hallway, and I need to believe at that point, like this says, you have something for me. Thank God I have a sponsor that I believe her. Get a sponsor you believe. I trust her. So when I, get to those rare, humble moments where I ask her what to do, yep, they're a little rare. She got a tough one. I sent her a note saying, thank you for putting up with me all the time. I trust her that what she tells me is right, that I believe what she's telling me, because I need to believe it, especially in those moments in the hallway. And you don't have the tools yet. And you don't know, is this really going to work? Mark H. and Dave F., I think, and there's an awesome Fellowship of the Spirit Big Book study they did. I don't know what year it is. I have a link to it and I'll put it in the chat. And they call it the second step proposition. Do I really believe that this thing is going to work? Do I believe that God's going to catch me and take care of my life? And when you've been to that point, because you feel it, it's an experience. It's not something you just, and like I said, I didn't get there when I first got here. I skipped in here easily. I had friends in AA. Oh, this is better than what I was doing. I loved it. Everyone talked from the heart. Never heard that. And then, here I love this, life will mean something at last. I love the word futile is occupied with trifles. That's one of the definitions, right? It's what I was doing in my life before, always trying to just fill that hole inside, and I've finally gotten to that place where I've gotten that key in the lock and I shift and I turn to God and say, what do you want me to do today? Today I have 2 AA commitments, and let me tell you, I had a rough weekend. There's crap going on in my life right now, and it's painful. And I'm so glad that I had service today. I mean, kind of. I sit around and wallow in it, but I know that's not good for me. I don't want to do that. I don't like that pain. So here I am, and I get to help other people. I get to be part of that, and that's amazing. And it doesn't fix everything right away like I want it to, like an alcoholic who wants to feel good right now. But it gets me through the next few hours, and God's taking care of my life. And I couldn't be more grateful. Anyway, thanks. Go ahead, Bill. You want to read?
I'll say one more thing that you brought up. Earlier in the book, it says, we have but 2 alternatives. One was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out our intolerable situation as best we could. The other was to accept spiritual help. And what Elizabeth just described is, just because I walk through the threshold into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous or pop onto this internet does not necessarily mean that I have given over to a spiritual life. Some of the ways that I try to blot out my intolerable situation is I've switched seats on the Titanic and then celebrate abstinence by collecting coins and counting days and getting cakes because I'm not drinking. Although I'm blowing my brains out at the casino, I'm involved in all these ridiculous relationships, watching pornography, whatever the manifestation is at the time, but I'm not drinking. And someone finally said to me, do you know why nothing remarkable ever happens in your life? And this is after 25 years of trying out for AA. I still didn't get sober for another 17, I don't think. But he said, Do you know why nothing remarkable ever happens in your life? And I said, why is that? He said, because you've never sincerely taken the position. So when Elizabeth is talking about that stage 2, second step, or whatever, Mark Houston and Dave F., do I really believe if at the jumping off place I jump, that God's going to catch me and take care of my life? Or am I going to continue with all these ways that don't look like alcoholism because I'm not drinking, try and outrun my alcoholism? Okay. How, and incidentally, remember now we're getting in, this is the infancy of Alcoholics Anonymous. They're writing this from a position when they're going to tell us about this fellowship. We have more people on some of our Zoom platforms that were sober on the face of the earth when this book came out. And not all of them stayed sober even after they boasted of sobriety, because there was a whole lot of alluring distractions and shortcuts in the future. But nonetheless, they're going to tell, well, how is this to come about? And we're the ones who are creating the fellowship we crave when we get a copy of the book, because we might live in Chicago or California or Pennsylvania or in the UK. So they were reaching out to people that the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous was the sponsorship at the time. How is this to come about, you ask? Where am I to find these people? You are going to meet these new friends in your own community, near you. Alcoholics are dying helplessly like people on a sinking ship. If you live in a large place, there are hundreds, high and low, rich and poor. These are future fellows of Alcoholics Anonymous. Among them, you will make lifelong friends. You will be bound to them with new and wonderful ties, for you will escape disaster together, and you will shoulder to shoulder your common journey. There you will know what it means to give of yourself that others may survive and rediscover life. You will learn the full meaning of love thy neighbor as thyself. It may seem incredible that these men are to become happy, respected, and useful once more. How can they arise out of such misery, bad repute, and hopelessness? The practical answer is that since these things have happened among us, they can happen with you. Should you wish them above all else and be willing to make use of our experience, we are sure they will come. The age of miracles is still with us. Our own recovery proves that. Go ahead.
Oh gosh, I was just thinking about how much people who first read this book, could read this and get hope. Especially when the book was written, so many people that received this book were really low bottom drunks, that had been to institutions, that had lost everything. And I just think, like, I just smile, and I've gotten more into the history in the past few years, and I think about when they found each other. We heard a great presentation yesterday in my home group, and he was bringing up all kinds of cool stuff about just that connection that was made between the two alcoholics, between Dr. Bob and Bill W. finding each other, and how that felt for them. And the comments that the Dr. Bob, he was only going to show up for 15 minutes, and they had to talk him into it. He's like, all right, sure, and he went. But this has come true for me. It's amazing that today, anything I go through, it is, even if it's hard, I have so many people I can talk to and walk this journey and not alone. And that's just meant the world to me. And then, it says the practical answer is, since things have happened among us, they can happen with you. And that statement to me also can be the other way. There are things that I didn't have to go through. I believe the people that told me that it happened for them. I worked with a woman who's in a wheelchair. I've worked with a woman who woke up in prison and was facing 20 years for killing her best friend in a blackout drunk car crash. I have the same disease as them. I believe them that that's waiting for me, that this is a death sentence if I don't choose to take the actions of this program and do what it says, and, earnestly do my best. But there's the love thy neighbor as thyself. I still struggle with that sometimes. I have a hard time with compassion for myself. This is something I've recently uh, discovered, because of a rock in my shoe person that I had a hard time having compassion for, that was kicking me under the table type thing, like my sister used to. You know what I'm saying? And it's awoken me to, like, I have a lot of work to still do. I don't know where I am if you compared it to, like, you talk to people and you're like, those people are in graduate school and I'm like in grade school. That feeling sometimes you get, you just like appreciate the people that feel like they're a little bit further out. But I know that it's okay. This is progress, not perfection. And I keep asking God for the next right thing to do. And then I try to do it. And then a lot of times I have a new experience that I didn't expect to have. So that's pretty amazing. And I bet you have some good stuff on this, Bill. So you go ahead.
Know if I have good stuff on it, but I was thinking I never came to Alcoholics Anonymous and never doubted that I had this thing. I didn't understand at first what alcoholism was. I didn't understand the term allergy. We talk about it in the meetings. Gals would come and say, I could drink all the guys under the table. It wasn't really boasting when you realize that you have an insatiable appetite for alcohol. That's one of the symptoms. It was the insanity to go back after I had gotten stopped. And I was thinking about as we were reading this, it may seem incredible that these people who have sunk to this place, remember, prior to this book coming out, and 4.5 years before that, there was no real relief in sight. Doctors had made a small chink in the armor of alcoholism, according to Dr. Silkworth. He says, you may wonder why we encourage this movement, even ahead of our own medical plans and procedures, because something in here is working. And I thought, am I sitting in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous hoping that I die before I take my next drink? Or am I more than free from alcohol? Have I been delivered or freed from the bondage of self? Because that's the problem. And that's what led me back every time. I never went out and started smoking crack. If I had $2 in my pocket, that would be the stupidest proposition I could think of, because I know, first of all, a $2 hit ain't enough to get me started. And I'm going to want the second hit more than the first, and the 50th more than the third. I know that about myself. It was the inability, when I was being called back into the abyss, to fend it off on my own, or to even access the power. Because although I believed in God, went to church, and got baptized so many times, one year they thought I was trying out for the Olympic swim team, that did not give me relief from my alcoholism, because my belief in God had nothing to do with my relationship or my connection with God. And it talks about it, and the more I see it, I've heard people say, the evidence that I've taken this step 3 is that what it is the decision to go on with the rest of the steps. And I think the more I read the pages in We Agnostics, I think step 2 is where I make a decision to go on with the rest of the steps, because I realize that if I don't access his power, I am going to drink myself to death regardless. And what Elizabeth is talking about is the consequences keep getting great. Whether I believe that could happen to me or not, I used to tell myself it wouldn't till it did. I was sitting at an AA meeting fighting my 5th DUI, and the guy came in and said that he was fighting a certain number of DUIs, 5 or 6, I don't remember. And while he was fighting it, he got another DUI, and then he ended up having to go to prison. And I said, what an idiot. And 3 months later, I got my 6th DUI while I was fighting my 5th DUI, came up with the defense that someone slipped me a Mickey. And my lawyer says, oh, I'll work with that. An unintentional DUI, you got enough money, I'll present anything to the court. When I got that next DUI, she said, I don't think that defense is going to work. I couldn't believe what was happening in my life, because I thought I had some power over the consequences of drinking, or at least staying sober once I got sober, because I was in AA. And this is one of the baffling features here. Alcoholism in its progressive state progresses whether I'm drinking or not. And I always underestimated my opponent, because at 21 years old, I could stay sober for years by going to meetings and not drinking because I said so. At 31, not so much. At 41, way less. And at 60 years old, I couldn't stay sober no matter how great the necessity or the wish. And unfortunately, by my own indelible memory, I went back to what I did at 21 and kept trying to get that to work. And if it didn't work to keep me sober forever from 21 till now, what I did at 21 would never work on the progressed stages of alcoholism. Something had to be collapsed when I got to the point where I knew if there wasn't something other than self, I was going to die. And it took me till I was 9 months and 3 days sober. And I had burnt my life to the ground like I had never burned it to the ground before. And that's when I realized that if there was not a power greater than myself that I could access, I was going to die whether I wanted to or not. And that was a hopeless state of mind that I found myself in. Okay. I don't know if that was a lot, as much as you expected me to say on that, Elizabeth, but that's what I have for that paragraph or two.
You want me to read? Yeah, okay. Our hope is that when this chip of a book is launched on the world tide of alcoholism, defeated drinkers will seize upon it to follow its suggestions. Many, we are sure, will rise to their feet and march on. They will approach still other sick ones, and fellowships of Alcoholics Anonymous may spring up in each city and hamlet, havens for those who must find a way out. In the chapter Working with Others, you gathered an idea of how we approach and aid others to health. Suppose now that through you, several families have adopted this way of life. You will want to know more of how to proceed from that point. Perhaps the best way of treating you to a glimpse of your future will be to describe the growth of the fellowship among us. Here's a brief account. But before we get to that, I'd really like to talk about the fact that it says they will approach still other sick ones. And I love how, we talked about it a lot in the last chapter that we read, which was Working with Others. In the early days, like they didn't say go to a meeting and talk about your problems. They said go help somebody else. And I read somewhere that there were times they didn't even have a meeting. They would just meet on a street corner and hand out 12-step calls. Do you want me to read a little more before you come in, or do you? Okay. Years ago in 1935, one of our number made a journey to a certain western city. From a business standpoint, his trip came off badly. Had he been successful in his enterprise, he would have been set on his feet financially, which at the time seemed vitally important. But his venture wound up in a lawsuit and bogged down completely. The proceeding was shot through with much hard feeling and controversy. Bitterly discouraged, he found himself in a strange place, discredited and almost broke. Still physically weak and sober but a few months, he saw that his predicament was dangerous. He wanted so much to talk with someone, but whom? One dismal afternoon, he paced a hotel lobby wondering how his bill was to be paid. At one end of the room stood a glass-covered directory of local churches. Down the lobby, a door opened into an attractive bar. He could see the gay crowd inside. In there, he would find companionship and release. Unless he took some drinks, he might not have the courage to scrape an acquaintance and would have a lonely weekend. Of course he couldn't drink, but why not sit hopefully at a table, a bottle of ginger ale before him? After all, had he not been sober 6 months now? Perhaps he could handle, say, 3 drinks, no more. Fear gripped him. He was on thin ice. Again, it was the old insidious insanity, that first drink. With a shiver, he turned away and walked down the lobby to the church directory. Music and gay chatter still floated to him from the bar. Do you want to speak now, or do you want to read some, or keep going?
I guess, I don't know, this whole thing is about the formation. I guess I'll say something here only because when you were telling it, if this was all I read was this book, this is a powerful moment in AA history. What I don't realize is there was a divine tapestry going on that started long before this. It started with a guy going to Europe, placing himself under the care of a psychiatrist who told him that his condition was beyond anything he could provide, that this Roland Hazard was an alcoholic of the hopeless variety, meaning Carl Jung, the psychiatrist at the time that had any chance of treating alcoholism, said, I've been trying to employ certain methods that have worked on other people, but I've never been successful. And Roland says to him, well, are there no exceptions? I got a lot of money. I got more money than life left. And Carl Jung says, yes, there are. Here and there, once in a while. Alcoholics have these spectacular experiences from the inside out. It revolutionizes and changes them. And Roland says, I must have this thing. He said, where do I find it? And Carl Jung says, that's the problem. I don't know. He said, "What the only thing I can suggest is that you place yourself in an atmosphere of grace. That's my term, not theirs. And you can only hope," he said. And Roland has it set out, and he found the Oxford group. And then a friend of Bill Wilson's, childhood friend, gets ready to be committed to a psych ward for running his car into some lady's house because they're shooting all this craziness. And some people at the Oxford group have a guy at the Oxford group, his father sitting on the bench, and they say, "Hey, parole him to us." The first papers in Alcoholics Anonymous, if AA was around then. Emmy gets involved in this Oxford group. He gets one of the components about this hopeless condition. And in his 11-step meditation, he can't get the thought of going and helping his childhood friend, Bill Wilson. And he makes the phone call. Dr. Silkworth invests his money in the stock market. He's ready to retire and the market crashes. Now, whether God crashed the market so that Alcoholics Anonymous could be formed, that has to happen, or Dr. Silkworth won't be working at Towns Hospital for $40 a week and board and run into Bill Wilson. Had Bill Wilson not gone to Akron and have his business trip go bad, he wouldn't have found himself pacing in the lobby wondering how he's going to pay his bill, be led to a directory where he sees a name of a clergyman who reminds him of what they used to call a walk in Vermont by the name of was called a tunk. And he makes that phone call, and he's reluctant to because the lady he's going to call is the same name of the people where the business venture ended up badly and a lawsuit was going to ensue. But he made the call anyhow. And he was put in touch with this Dr. Bob 23 miles from where I live. And Alcoholics Anonymous was born. If I'm reading just this story, okay, great. The guy walks in there and he says, "Oh, what about those other alcoholics who won't have this thing?" Big deal. And like Sheldon says, in step 2, we came to believe, he said, if I came to the grocery store to get milk, I came to get milk. We came to Alcoholics Anonymous to believe. And something takes place here when I pay attention to the great beyond myself, beyond the group, beyond us collectively. There is a power that has been guiding us and leading us that we think is out to get us. And thank God, before we even get to step 3 prayer, it says, "We guess what? You can lose your fear of today, tomorrow, or the eternity. You ain't got to be afraid no more because the God you've been believing in doesn't even exist. Not only doesn't he have those characteristics, he never did." That's enough for my spiritual hilltop, Elizabeth.
Let's read it. Let's read a little bit more. But what about his responsibilities, his family, and the men who would die because they would not know how to get well? Ah, yes, those other alcoholics. There must be many such in this town. He would phone a clergyman. His sanity returned, and he thanked God. Selecting a church at random from the directory, he stepped into a booth and lifted the receiver. His call to the clergyman led him presently to a certain resident of the town who, though formerly able and respected, was then nearing the nadir of alcoholic despair. It was the usual situation: home in jeopardy, wife ill, children distracted, bills in arrears, and standing damaged. He had a desperate desire to stop, but saw no way out, for he had earnestly tried many avenues of escape. Painfully aware of being somehow abnormal, the man did not fully realize what it meant to be alcoholic. And this asterisk says this refers to Bill's first visit with Dr. Bob. Boy, I need glasses for that. Hold on. These men later became co-founders of AA. Bill's story opens the text of this book. Dr. Bob's heads the story section. When our friend related his experience, the man agreed that no amount of willpower he might muster could stop his drinking for long. A spiritual experience, he conceded, was absolutely necessary, but the price seemed high upon the basis suggested. He told how he lived in constant worry about those who might find out about his alcoholism. He had, of course, the familiar alcoholic obsession that few knew of his drinking. Why, he argued, should he lose the remainder of his business only to bring still more suffering to his family by foolishly admitting his plight to people from whom he made his livelihood? He would do anything, he said, but that. Being a treat, however, he invited our friend to his home. Some time later, and just as he thought he was getting control of his liquor situation, he went on a roaring bender. For him, this was the spree that ended all sprees. He saw that he would have to face his problems squarely, that God might give him mastery. One morning, he took the bull by the horns and set out to tell those he feared what his trouble had been. He found himself surprisingly well received and learned that many knew of his drinking. Stepping into his car, he made the rounds of people he had hurt. He trembled as he went about, for this might mean ruin, particularly to a person in his line of business. At midnight, he came home exhausted but very happy. He has not had a drink since. As we shall see, now he means a great deal to his community, and the major liabilities of 30 years of hard drinking have been repaired in 4. Can you speak on that?
Jeff, do I have anything? And then you'll come in and comment on the last 3 pages. Perfect.
Okay.
It's interesting. The only thing, and this is how rapid this was done, whether or not they had a 12-step program back in 1935, I doubt it. But they understood, based on what Ebby had approached Bill with, certain things had to be done: restitution, confession, moral, all the stuff that's got to take place, readjustment. And the second manifestation of self that we look at in the 4th step is fear. And Dr. Bob was afraid to tell people that he was an alcoholic. He didn't go out and do some of the treacherous stuff that some of us do now with our keen minds and fine intellects with the new chemicals out there. But he was afraid that if he told people that he was an alcoholic, or that he had operated under them, not remembering it, being under the influence, that his reputation, his livelihood would be destroyed. But he was able to connect the dots. The one tenet or facet of this recovery process that he was unwilling to do, and he drank again. And he comes home after he has his first couple beers that day. For whatever reason, God did not or disallowed the phenomenon of craving to overtake him. He made amends and didn't have a drink since. The importance of this is that this was done rapidly. We've turned Alcoholics Anonymous into like a smorgasbord where you get to take what you want and leave the rest, and that's not the intent. If you look at the basis of our 4-step resentment inventory, the definite example that Bill uses there, Mrs. Brown, Mr. Brown, the wife, his employer, Mrs. Jones, or whoever the hell it is, those are current events. Those are people that are dominating his thinking right now. Even if I got done with the resentments right now and could see how self blocked me from God, I've got the rest of my life to go back through my life and search out all the familiar circumstances that the ex-wife and the one before that and the girlfriend and the job and the employer and the boss, they all seem to produce the same result. Get rid of me either by getting fired, getting restraining orders, getting divorced. Either way, at the end of the road, they all want me out and I hate them for it and don't realize that I'm the one doing it. But if I can come in here and my rear end is on fire and I'm willing to do anything that the dying are due, and someone sits down with me and I make a decision to surrender my will and life to God, not because I believe in God, but because I believe I'm destroying myself, and I pick up a pen, even with 4 resentments right now of current events, that's enough to open a chink in the armor or give a crack for the sunlight of the Spirit to get in and allow me to get some freedom to connect with this power and move forward. So they didn't wait around. It was a program of recovery. It was pretty rapid and pretty efficient. We had the rest of our lives to do either an updated 4th or a 10th step. So I love this.
You know, I notice that we keep pointing out over and over again the theme of absolute 100% willingness to do whatever. You know, it's not, oh, I'm going to modify this, you know, to Elizabeth's Anonymous. I love when people say that. But back in the, wait, where is it? Oh, shoot, I can't find it super fast. Where it talks about, you know, that Dr. Bob had tried before, but until he met up with Bill and really understood how much he has to do, you know, he didn't understand. Well, actually, he did, because I've read that now, that he actually did say that he understood the medical part, but you know, something about seeing that this man knows what he's talking about. He's been through it. There's something that he's doing that's working. He believed it. But it's funny how, you know, he's hesitant at first and he doesn't want to go all the way. And how many times do we meet these people in AA that we try to work with? It's like, oh, I'll do this, but I won't do that. And until they're really ready to do whatever it takes, you know, I mean, we see what happens. And I love how this is emphasized again. Once he does that, and I love stories like that because I need to hear them. Because again, the thing on page 53, people, hey, we're over here on the shores of faith. It's really great. And I'm like, but I don't want to let go of this bridge. I'm there a lot. I've been there so many times, and I need to know that it works. I need to know that if I really let go. My sponsor has some story about a wheelbarrow. I don't even know what it is. I'm sure you guys have heard the wheelbarrow. Are you willing to get in the wheelbarrow on the tightrope? uh, but I just love how that's pointed out for us again, um, and once he does that, he has that experience. He has an amazing experience that he did not predict. He thought he was going to have all these people turn their back on him. He's going to lose his livelihood, but look what happens. And isn't it beautiful? I remember one time being in a meeting, and it was an in-person meeting. The room was absolutely packed, standing room only. And this guy like raised his hand. They were like, is anybody new or at their first meeting? And, he raised his hand and he said, my wife kicked me out last night. And you could hear he was just about to cry. And I mean, you could hear a pin drop. He's like, I'll do whatever it takes. I want this. I want to get sober. And, he'd lost the thing. That was it for him. Right. And I've seen him from time to time. He stayed sober. He left that meeting with a big book. And it's that earnestness. Like, I have to be willing. It's that no reservations, right? What does it say in the 5th step, right? Have I left anything out? Is there anything I'm holding on to? Bill, you and I have talked about, rigorous honesty in all of our affairs. And then when it's not there, shit happens. It's bad, and then it can lead us back to a drink. Like we know people not living these principles 100%. I mean, we're all going to slip, right? We can't, there aren't absolutes for a reason. We don't have the 4 absolutes in here. Bill knew not to put those in the book, but they should be a goal, and I'm always at that turning point over and over again with all of them. And it's my guide all the time, even when it's hard. You want to read some and then unmute yourself?
Well, to be honest with you, I was going to stop there for today.
Okay.
And then we're going to talk about how the fellowship and allow people to come in and share so that we don't take them hostage till 1:30 unless they want to be hostage taken till 1:30. But please, we'd like to hear any comments or questions that you guys have. We're going to stop the recording. Ollie, is that right?